Okay, bump mapping in XSI. There's a certain amount of confusion about bump mapping in XSI. I think in part due to the fact that many of us have come from Softimage and other packages as well, I think, where you make a bump map simply by slapping an image, a texture image onto a surface and then hitting a toggle button that says make this a bump map, and it goes ahead and bumps it for you. In XSI, it's slightly more involved than that, with good reason, I think. The simplicity you trade off against a great deal more control. It's more involved because it's giving you, it's opening up a little more what's going on under the hood of bump mapping. I think a lot of people believe that bump mapping is just where an image is very bright, the surface is raised, and where it's very dark, the surface is lowered. But it's a bit more involved than that, because bump mapping, what bump mapping actually does is perturb normals. It gives a fake, a sort of pretend change of surface across an object, and it does that by perturbing normals. And if you think about a vertex normal is a direction. The bump mapping changes the direction of the vertex normal and foxes the shader into thinking that the surface really has changed. And of course, an image is just an intensity, and there's not enough image in a scalar. There's not enough information in a scalar intensity to tell the bump map how to, or in what kind of direction to change the vertex normal. What actually goes on, without going into too much detail really, is that there's a lot of calculation of rates of change of intensity across a surface that extract sort of vector information from that and use that to perturb the normal. Anyway, enough of that. Let's start off with a simple image bump map. Sphere with a texture projection on it, straight XY projection, render tree, Lambert shader. To do a texture, to do a image bump map, there's a bump sub menu down here, and the thing we're looking for is the bump map generator. And the bump map generator looks not really very dissimilar to the straightforward image texture node. There's a image input, and the bump map generator is more or less the equivalent to the texture image node, except that the output is a vector. And if we open up the Lambert shader, there's a bump map input, which is a vector, the yellow node there. There's also a bump map input in the material. It doesn't really matter which one you used, but I tend to prefer to use this one here for no other reason than that there are quite a few illumination nodes that don't have a bump map input included in them, so I just stick it in there so that I don't have to worry about working out whether there is a bump map input node in the shader there or not. So you take your bump map generator and you take the output and you put it into the bump map. In the bump map generator, much the same as in the image texture node there, you have an image, and you can, and it also has a texture projection. And if you already have a texture projection on there, which we do, much the same as the texture image node, that's where you select your projection. There's a factor slider in here which controls the amount of bumping, and if we take a look at the preview region in there, you'll see low a bump map. If any of you have been confused with bump maps and have tried to plug a straight RGB output directly into the bump map there, you'll probably notice straight away that that's a far better quality bump than you would get by using an RGB node. And that's really all there is to it for straightforward image bump mapping. Change the intensity there, ramp it up. If you want to make it go into the negative, scale it back down again. So that's image bump generating. Okay, that's all well and good. What happens if you want to use a procedural image? Well, it's really just an extension of this one. We still use the bump map generator, and we use a texture generator from down here in this part of the menu, and the reason for that is because we need the coordinate input, as you'll see in just a second. I'm going to get a grid input there, and the grid output is RGB. There it is there, and there's a coordinate input there. And what I do is I plug the output of the 2D grid into the input there, replacing the image that's there. Now, we've lost all our bump map there, and there's two reasons for that. The first is that we need something into the coordinate input. We don't use a texture space generator in this case here. What we use is a vector state node. Plug that into the coordinate, open up the vector state node, and the state parameter that we're interested in is the texture vector there. We still have nothing in there, and the reason for that is that this 2D grid node here is a grossly oversimplified one. I'm just going to quickly make that black and that wide. It's a grossly oversimplified one. There's no texture tiling or scaling or anything information in there, and the reason why we can't see anything there is the grid is actually being a single cell element is being placed directly over the top. I think you can just about pick up the edge of the cell there, so it's a single grid cell on there. So what we need to do is tile it, and we tile that by using a texture space controller edit node there. It's pretty much like straightforward texturing if we're using any of these generator nodes here for texturing, as we have in some of the earlier tutorials in this series here. We just put our texture edit node in there and in there, edit that, this is pretty familiar, and turn up the tiling. Bang. And there's our bump map. Pretty good bump map, really. You can control the offset here and so on as well if you want, but it gives you control over the vector state in there. So that's our procedural bump mapping. If we change these parameters here, we can control the intensity of the bump mapping by changing these colours here. We can lower it down a little bit if we want, raise it up, and all of these, if we make a, I don't know, 0.5 diffusion in there, we get a slightly softer look in there. And that's basically it. That's bump mapping using a procedural. Okay, the next thing we want to look at is how we blend bump maps together. It's slightly different from, in some respects, it's slightly different from blending ordinary textures together for ordinary texture mapping. Part of the reason for that is that, again, we're dealing with vectors here. Two ways of doing this. One is to work within the vector space, which is which would be by putting in by combining in the vector output here, and the other way to do it is in the RGB space, which would be in here like this. Let's have a look at the vector method first. We have a bump map generator there. What we're going to do is we're going to use two images and we're going to blend them together. So get rid of that. I'm just going to turn off that region just for speed there for the moment. Now, bump map generator, there's one. Bump map generator, there's our second one there. They both have the same image there. I've got two textures already loaded. I've got a cross, sorry, not that cross. We want cross one. This is it's slightly softened at the edges, so you just get a nice soft fall off around there. And this one here, we're going to use a circle, which looks like that. And what we want to do is to blend these two together. Now we're going to blend them here, and then feed the result of the blend into the bump map here. These outputs are vectors, so we need, well, it's quite tempting, and I've seen people do it, to convert these into RGBs and then use a mixed two colours and then convert the output of the mixed two colours back into a vector node and plug it into the bump map. And it looks dreadful because you're going back into RGB space and you're destroying all the vector information. You really don't want to do that. So there is a node which works perfectly well for us in the math, and it's a vector node, or vector math vector as it's titled when you get the node in there. Open it up and you'll see you've got two vector inputs there, and then you've got a number of operations that you can perform between those two vectors, or between a vector and the scalar. There's a scalar input here as well, so you can multiply scalars by vectors, or you can add vectors together, subtract vectors, multiply vectors together as well. The one we're interested in, fairly obviously, is the vector addition. We're using a vector plus vector. So the vector input 1 is added to vector input 2, and the result comes out on the output there. And put this in the center here, and we just plug the output of the bump map generators into those two inputs there, bang, and the output into the bump map there, and have a look and see at the resulting bump map. There, you can just pick that out. We've added together the cross and the circle. We can individually control the amount of bumping in the cross and the circle by playing around with their with the factors in their individual bump map per generator node. So I've increased the cross there, or I can invert it there as well, and the two added together. Okay, well that works well enough. There's not a huge amount of flexibility there, because supposing you wanted to, I don't know, supposing you wanted one bump inside the cross area and a different bump outside of the cross area, you couldn't do that using vector math. You'd have to do that in RGB space, and the RGB space that you do it in is in this section here. So I'm just going to destroy all this. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to keep one bump map generator because we'll need that, as you'll see in just a second. Now, because we're going to be working in this area here, we're in RGB space, so I take that means that I can use a mix 2 colors node, and if you remember from the earlier tutorials, the mix 2 colors node gives us a lot of flexibility in the way that we can combine two images together. If I want, for example, to use the cross as a mat, then I would plug the cross into the weight input node there, and then the other two bumps into these two inputs here. So do that, and you'll notice immediately that actually it doesn't go in. It won't go in, and that's because these are inputs for the bump map generator. There's some slight differences between the images that go into the bump map generator and the images that go into an RGB texture node. So that's not a huge problem, because we can in fact use image lookups here and another image lookup here. This is a cheat, really. It's just a way of getting hold of our correct images. Okay, we've got a no icon in there, we've got a circle there, we've got a cross there. Plug the so now that we've got these image lookups, we've got something that we can plug into, and we also know that the image lookup will actually plug into the mix 2 colors nodes there. So it's just a little bit of a workaround there. So we have a circle, and we have a cross, and we have a no icon picture. What we want to do is place the this might work the right way around, it might not. Let's just try it out and see. What I'm going to try and do is bump the no icon image inside the cross and the circle outside of the cross. So the cross goes into the weight, the circle, and I need another image lookup, I beg your pardon, there, and I need to put the cross into that there, the circle into that, I beg your pardon, and break that out of there. Sorry, that's all getting a bit weird there. Ignore that for a second. So I've got 3 image lookups, one for no icon, one for cross, and one for circle. I've plugged the cross into the weight of our mix 2 colors. I'm going to put the circle into color 1, and I'm going to put the no icon into color 2. So I'm using the cross as a mat for these two. Now we have an RGB output here, which will plug into the bump map generator. If you remember, we could plug procedurals into here, and equally we can plug any RGB that we want into that input there. Now there's only one other thing which is missing. If you recall, when we did our procedural, we had a vector state node that we plugged into the coordinate of our procedural texture, and we need to do the same with the image lookup. We get a state, vector state. We change the state parameter to be texture vector there, and then we can use the same vector state into all 3 of our coordinates here, here, and here. So each one of these, this, and this, looks pretty much like our procedural. bump mapping did. The only difference is it's now going into a mix 2 colours, and the output of the mix 2 colours goes into the bump map generator, which we can now plug directly into the bump map, and hopefully, yeah, that's it. I've got this the wrong way round. I was going to put a no icon in the middle. Let's just do that. No icon goes into where the circle was, and the circle goes into where the no icon was. Okay, and that's it. Completely and totally a no icon bump map inside the cross and a circle outside of the cross area. Let's rearrange that so we haven't quite so many cross wires in there. There. Quite simple, really. You also have the added flexibility of being able to use any one of these mixes here. Currently we're using a mix, but we can use an add there. So we're seeing a little bit of the circle appear in there. I've got no idea what happens if you use any of these other ones in here. You can try those out for yourself. I'm sure you'll get some very strange results. But the mix is the one that we're interested in, and that's it. You can change the intensity of any one of these by where are we? Yes, if you wanted to change the intensity of any of these relative to each other, then what you would do is put a color correction node or an image intensity node in here, in any of these, to boost that up. Let's just do that quickly. Image processing, color correction, and let's boost the no icon there, in there, input there, and that goes into color 1. So there, so we're decreasing the amount of bump in there, level there. For some reason, I don't know quite why it's going that way. But yeah, so you've got a lot of flexibility in there. I mean, bear in mind as well that with color corrections you can do things like changing contrast of it to change the characteristics of the bump, and so on and so forth. So that pretty much covers. Just to mention as well that we've used image lookups here, we're image texturing, but in this RGB space, the RGB portion of this bump map tree here, you can also use procedurals in there, any number of procedurals in exactly the same way as this. So that pretty much covers bump mapping in the XSI render tree.